We now have firm evidence of what F1 will really be like to watch in 2026 and which teams have ended up getting the new rules right or badly wrong. This is just one track with very specific energy management demands, so we are wary of declaring a definitive pecking order, but it is a start. So who are the early winners and losers from F1's massive shakeup? McLaren had always suspected was coming into the campaign slightly on the back foot compared to works teams Ferrari and Mercedes, but the scale of the deficit to the top teams was a surprise. World champion Lando Norris came home more than 50 seconds adrift of race winner George Russell. That deficit was slightly exaggerated by the fact Norris had spent much of his race battling for position, which cost him time, rather than running in clean air that Russell had after his pit stop. But there is no denying that McLaren needs two-pronged gains to close that gap to the front. Its chassis is no longer the benchmark, and it is working on some imminent upgrades that it hopes will bring much needed lap time. Of bigger priority right now though, is getting more on top of energy management. The gulf between what it is doing with its Mercedes power unit and what the Mercedes team is doing was laid bare in Melbourne. Tenths of a second are being lost by McLaren on straights because it hadn't got its harvesting and deployment tactic as right, and now it needs to find out why. Audi enjoyed a point-scoring debut in F1, and the opening weekend suggests it can be a real factor at the front of the midfield in its maiden season as a works team. It still has work to do with a package that seems pretty brisk, but not super reliable. Gabriel Bortoleto made it to Q3, which was great, but couldn't take part, not great, because his car stopped in the pits with a technical issue. Nico Hülkenberg was then unable to even start the race because of, again, a technical issue that prevented Audi from having a genuine shot at a double points finish in the Grand Prix. Frustratingly, Audi is not communicating particularly openly, so the nature of its problems in Australia remains vague. Hopefully that improves, because this looks like a season in which Audi could have a very good story to tell about its long-awaited F1 debut. Williams is absolutely nowhere in F1's midfield. As Alex Albon said, it's ended up in no man's land between the teams fighting for points and the out-and-out backmarkers. Team boss James Vowles has finally admitted that the majority of its deficit comes from weight, having pointlessly and awkwardly dodged questions about whether the car was heavy in pre-season. The lap times and behavior on track betrayed the real answer, and it's no surprise that Vowles now says there is a large amount of mass to lose on the car. This is a very poor position for a team that finished 5th last year and spent so long extolling the virtues of its long-term planning and big 2026 focus. It should recover lost ground quickly, but if its progress is limited and its trajectory only takes it so far in the midfield fight, then 2026 will rapidly turn into a wasted season. Mercedes was knocked off its perch during the ground effect era, winning just 7 races from 2022 to 2025, but it's back on top under the new regulations. That's much to the relief of team principal Toto Wolff. The Mercedes power unit is so far the market leader, and although the team's 8/10 advantage over next best in qualifying in Australia probably flattered it, the race showed Mercedes does have a clear edge. And George Russell, once aware the race was under control, definitely didn't stretch his legs and show the full pace of the Mercedes W17. If Mercedes had not started this rule cycle strongly, then it would have been a dire indictment of underlying problems. However, the combination of the power unit, outstanding energy management strategy, and a very good chassis in terms of aerodynamic and mechanical performance means it's firm favourite for the World Championship. The speculation that Aston Martin and Honda plan to start and park in the Austrian Grand Prix aged very poorly, although the reality still wasn't much to celebrate. Not only did the two Aston Martins complete more than a handful of Grand Prix laps, Lance Stroll was actually still running at the finish. Wasn't classified though, as he only completed 43 of the 58 laps due to some downtime in the garage while the team performed various checks. Fernando Alonso retired early, after 21 laps, but this decision was made to save parts, not because something failed. The countermeasures to mitigate severe vibrations suffered in testing worked well enough that Aston Martin and Honda were actually quietly confident that their cars could have lasted the whole race. But they played it very safe because mileage is critical right now, and any failures here could have stopped them from doing anything meaningful in China. It's at least a step in the right direction. There's a really close gang of 4 teams vying for the lower points positions, headed up by Haas and Racing Bulls. Haas should be very happy with how it's starting 2026. The Ferrari customer team has nailed its preparation for these new rules and looks like it has a quick, consistent, and well-understood package. Meanwhile, at Racing Bulls, Arvid Lindblad produced a great Grand Prix debut, and not just because he became the 3rd youngest point scorer in F1 history. The 18-year-old had a complete weekend getting the most out of a very strong Racing Bulls package. It made a mockery of question marks about whether Lindblad had been promoted to F1 prematurely after a patchy season in Formula 2. These two teams, Haas and Racing Bulls, are less fancy than the bigger projects in the midfield, and they'll have their work cut out to stay ahead of it. Audi was impressively quick in Australia, and Alpine much more competitive in the race than in qualifying. Actually, Alpine was the only team to let us down from pre-season. Our ranking of the teams after Bahrain was almost exactly how it turned out in Australia too, just with Alpine behind Racing Bulls and Audi. It feels like any of those 4 teams could lead the midfield at any given track though. They definitely seem clear of the other three, and we're unashamedly claiming we got the backmarker order right in testing too, after suspecting Aston Martin would be quicker, but the Cadillac would be more likely to finish. Want more 2026 insight like that? Make us your F1 Paddock Pass by joining the Race Members Club. Get 90% off your first month in the Members Club and come behind the scenes with us for exclusive updates, expert analysis, and bonus podcasts just for you. Just check out the link below to claim your 90% discount. The modest celebrations after Cadillac's thrice-lapped 16th place finish in the season opener can be excused, as they were obviously not about the result itself. Getting on the grid and getting a car to the end of the race were the first tangible achievements for a massive undertaking. Nobody involved was really cheering being last. Aston Martin got tagged together in time to leave Cadillac the slowest team by far in qualifying, although in the race they actually weren't too far apart. Sergio Perez and Valtteri Bottas ran between the two Aston Martins in the first part of the race, and after Bottas and Alonso retired, Perez was still comfortably ahead of Stroll. Comparing well to a massively hobbled Aston Martin is the extent of the achievement though. Perez was very keen to stress that the honeymoon is over. The time to celebrate in F1 has passed, and now Cadillac needs to rapidly improve its car. It was 1.3 seconds behind the next real midfield car in Melbourne qualifying, and the only team to finish 3 laps down, so reducing these deficits is an obvious target. Things had not looked great for Ferrari after qualifying in Australia, when Mercedes comfortably locked out the front row and Red Bull's Isaac Hadjar emerged as best of the rest. Amid the brilliant getaways and a thrilling duel between Charles Leclerc and George Russell in the opening stages, Ferrari offered a hint of being closer than initially feared. The early laps may have been a false dawn, as Mercedes did seem clearly quicker once it had consolidated track position, but Leclerc was positively surprised that the race pace was more competitive than his qualifying deficit of 8 tenths. Ferrari's also provided a glimmer of hope that the fastest car can be overcome on track, and it established itself as the clear number 2 in the order in the process. We must also not forget that F1 2026 is going to be an intense development war, so the competitive picture is not going to be static. Mercedes took first blood in Australia, but Ferrari has at least sealed its place as the main challenger, and given us hope that 2026 is not going to be a Silver Arrow's whitewash. Alpine's switch to Mercedes customer power this year was expected to deliver F1's bottom 2025 team a big step up in performance this year. So it was a surprise to see that neither Pierre Gasly nor Franco Colapinto made it out of Q2 with the same engine that George Russell had stormed to pole with. But Alpine had been braced for a tough time. In the words of its managing director Steve Nielsen, it is carrying an aero injury at the moment. The A526 has a weakness in high-speed corners causing understeer. Such a trait points to a front wing that is perhaps not performing as it should when the speeds go up. Alpine will also need to work on its energy deployment strategy given it lost a lot to lead midfield team Racing Bulls on several straights in qualifying, but the high-speed weakness was evident in turns 9 and 10. Nielsen says a fix is coming. The hope is that it will be ready for the Japanese Grand Prix, which means that Alpine just needs to survive China, which is mainly slow in medium-speed corners anyway. The only surprise about Red Bull's position in the Australian Grand Prix pecking order was that it was able to sneak third on the grid in qualifying. Red Bull sincerely predicted it was 4th best after testing. And that's exactly where it ended up in the race, behind Mercedes, Ferrari, and McLaren. Yes, it might have beaten McLaren, had Isaac Hadjar not suffered an engine failure on the first weekend for Red Bull's maiden F1 engine. Hadjar did a great job to qualify third, but a depleted battery at the start didn't let him capitalize on it, and his race only lasted 10 laps anyway. Meanwhile, Max Verstappen had a routine rise through the order after his unusual off in qualifying, which Red Bull still hasn't fully explained. Could it genuinely have been a rare driver error, overdoing it on the brakes in conjunction with the aggressive 2026 engine harvesting demands? Whatever the reason, this was a muted opener for a team used to fighting for the title. Even if it expected to be on the back foot given the size of the engine challenge it has taken on, there was more on the table in Australia.